Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you about something that's really close to my heart, gender narratives. I'm going to start with introducing you to my niece, Eva, and nephew, Ari. About 3 years ago, when they were 7 and 4, I overheard a conversation between Eva and Ari, where Eva told Ari, you're so lucky to be a boy, because when you grow up, you can be anything. But I'm not excited to grow up because I have to be a wife and I have to have a baby. Pretty heavy and kind of sounds like a made-up story, right? Just for the TED Talk. Believe me, I wish it was. At only 7, Eva had absorbed this story and was able to articulate a tension that many women feel in their lives and are not able to fully understand or express. No one had explicitly told Eva this story, but as many of you know, there were a lot of things that were implied that this was going to be her future. In Afghanistan, I heard messages like this when I was growing up. A good girl needs to take care of everyone else and be selfless. A good girl upholds family honor. Everyone knows the plot of Mulan. Kind of comes from that. Afghanistan consistently ranks as one of the lowest scoring countries when it comes to gender equality. Canada, on the other hand, we see it as a better place for women and their opportunities and rights. So when my family came to Canada 18 years ago, I felt a sense of relief. I was excited to be in Canada because it meant the limitations that I had grown up hearing would disappear. But somehow, here we were, 15 years later, my niece was expressing the same limiting beliefs that I had heard growing up. What connects these two worlds that seem so different and seem so apart? In Afghanistan right now, under Taliban rule, women have no rights, no access to education, no access to work or freedom. In Canada, we're no longer fighting for these basic rights. We're not fighting to be seen as equals in the eyes of the law. But I feel like we get, a sense that we're far from equal. Today, in Canada, we still see deeply gendered patterns in society. 80% of healthcare workers are women, predominantly as nurses. 80% of women still to this day change their last names after marriage. And in one survey, 79% of Canadians believe that women have to compromise when it comes to relationships, family, and career in a way that men don't. To some, these patterns may seem like only indicators of personal preference for women just like caring professions or are gravitating towards that. Or women just like the sound of their husband's last name more than their own. The last one's harder to argue, but hey, who doesn't compromise? I think the thing that connects both Afghanistan and Canada are gender narratives. The stories, beliefs, assumptions that we all of us hold, that tell us what choices are appropriate for us based on our gender. These narratives hold massive power over us. In my research, what I learned is that gender narratives, the same ones that show up explicitly in Afghanistan, are still present in the supposedly equal societies like Canada, but in a disguised form under practicality or personal preference. In Afghanistan, you may hear something like, "A good woman keeps everyone happy." But in Canada, maybe the context changes and the story goes, "I naturally pay more attention to others' emotional needs," or "I'm more attuned to everyone else's emotions." My research with Hazara women showed 3 key narratives that show up in this way. The first one being the natural order narrative. In the explicit form, it may sound like women are naturally designed as caregivers. Women's primary purpose is reproduction. In the disguised form, it may sound like women just have maternal instincts that, frankly, men don't. The second one being the cultural guardian narrative that positions women as preservers of tradition. Explicitly, it sounds like, and this is something I've heard personally, when a woman marries, she joins her husband's family and forgets her own. In the disguised form, it may sound like, "I like the tradition of taking my husband's last name. It's romantic." The third key narrative is the incomplete woman narrative, which in the explicit form is very clear. A woman without children is barren and purposeless. In the disguised form, it may sound like, "Don't you worry, you'll regret not having children. Nothing compares to that bond." So do you see how, hearing all of these things, women collectively, en masse, continue making the same choices and live the same lives? If we're taught from a young age that girls must nurture, preserve, find fulfillment through others, these narratives don't just influence our decisions, they influence and shape our reality, our possibilities, our imagination. I can sense that logically, we're all at the same place. We see and we understand how this could happen. But what if we were to flip one of these narratives for men? Let's imagine a world where the narrative you heard everywhere was that a man is barren, without children, and purposeless. This exercise almost feels unimaginable to me because the world would be nothing like it is today. Right? In what world could this narrative actually be true? In a matriarchal system where women are the authors of history? Would history still be a thing? Or would it be herstory? That's a joke. If we were to somehow popularize this narrative, we go tell our siblings, our brothers, our dads, the CEOs of our companies that this is the narrative to live by, our economic system would shift and transform almost overnight. Companies would compete for the best paternity benefits. Childcare would become prestigious work. And political candidates will showcase nurturing qualities rather than toughness. Career paths would accommodate fatherhood. Executives would lead with proud father of 3 in their bios. And childless people would face quiet suspicion that they don't know what really matters to society. The fact that this exercise was so mind-bending for all of us tells us narratives aren't just stories we tell. They shape the architecture of our entire social and economic systems. When we accept these narratives without question, we limit not just individual choices, but our collective human potential. Coming back to reality, even though these powerful narratives exist and we see the effect of these on women every day in our lives, 40% of Canadians think that we've gone too far and now discriminate against men. That's almost half of us. I think this dissonance happens because many of the measures that we're taking to fight gender inequality are surface level instead of dealing with the root causes that perpetuate inequality. Clearly, the argument that I'm making is that narratives are one of the root causes. But there is another thing that continues to uphold and pass on these gender narratives, which are power imbalances. If we look at who gets to write these stories and write these narratives, we think about the religious authorities who are interpreting God's words, or scientists who are uncovering natural phenomena. We find that they're overwhelmingly men who hold a patriarchal lens to look at the world. Yet these narratives aren't just presented as a perspective out of many. They're presented as objective reality, as divine revelation. If you remember, in the 19th century, some scientists proved that women were unable to have rational thought because their brains were smaller. And the story we've all heard that Eve was created from Adam's rib as an indication of women's subservient role. When the authors of our collective stories all share the same vantage point, historically men's vantage point, then their perspectives isn't seen as perspectives. They're mistaken for reality itself. And that's the biggest power imbalance of all. So gendered narratives and power imbalances collectively create biased negotiation grounds that result in the gendered outcomes that we see today. What looks like a practical decision is made as a decision not on a playing field that's level. And the cycle then perpetuates itself. Once these choices are made, women sacrifice for the family, performing essential and unpaid work. Children absorb these narratives as natural, internalizing them. And these gendered outcomes continue to propagate the same power imbalances and the same narratives as natural and logical. And meanwhile, even modest attempts to undo this is considered to be anti-meritocratic, or women who benefit from these kind of programs, for example, would be considered diversity hires, instead of seeing them for what they are, which is a small step in the right direction of correcting the historical imbalances. So to make real change, we must challenge the narratives that are at the root of our inequality. So what can we, all of us, regardless of gender, do to make a change? First, I think it's important to recognize that this fight isn't just for women. This isn't just a women's issue. Gender narratives limit men's lives equally. We've heard boys don't cry. Vulnerability is weakness. Your worth is measured by the size of your paycheck, not the thing you were thinking about. This isn't about men helping women with this issue. It's about all of us. So let's do this together. When we frame gender equality as just a women's issue, it's only half the story. So with this understanding, what can we do to break the cycle? Ask yourself these 4 questions, starting with, what story about gender am I accepting as just the way things are? Is it that girls are more emotional and boys are more logical? women are more patient, men are not. Simply recognizing these as stories rather than facts creates the first crack in their power. Ask, who benefits when I believe this story? When we ask who benefits, we often find that the narratives that seem natural or neutral are actually maintaining the current power imbalances. Then ask, what am I afraid would happen if I challenge this story? We might fear social rejection, disappointment from family, being seen as difficult, radical, or confrontational. Naming these fears again create new negotiation grounds. And the last but not least, what small action could interrupt this pattern today? I'll give you some examples. Let all kids play with all types of toys. I think this is like the most basic thing, but I keep wanting to repeat it because it's just not seen the way it needs to be seen. Boys can play with dolls. Let boys feel their emotions. Let boys cry. Let girls take risks. Let girls have buzz cuts. Divide household responsibilities based on preference, not on gender. Don't say boys will be boys. Notice and appreciate when someone defies a gender expectation. Ask why when you catch yourself making a gendered assumption. These actions may seem small, but they create space for new stories. I hope what I'm proposing doesn't seem uncomfortable. If it is, sit with the discomfort and reflect on where that's coming from. There might be a narrative there to deconstruct. My invitation for you today is to reflect on these 4 questions because the stakes are high. Without change, we will continue making the same choices out of practicality and preferences. We'll continue developing policies that only simulate surface level equality without delivering it. And perhaps most critically, will subconsciously transmit the same constraining narratives to the next generation. When my niece and nephew, who are now 10 and 7, have a conversation today, I want them to be able to say, I'm excited to grow up because I can become anything, and there's nothing holding me back. That's what I want for all of us. Thank you.